Full spoilers ahead.
Some people have called Gravity emotionally heart-wrenching and transcendent, and other people have called it sentimental bullshit in outer space. That's an actual quote. Gravity is a 2013 sci-fi thriller, written, directed, and produced by Alfonso Cuarón, who also directed Children of Men and one of the Harry Potter movies, and my favorite Mexican film, Y tu mama también. Gravity received more awards in 2014 than I've received in my entire life. It got Best Director, Best Cinematography, Best Visual Effects, Best Editing, Best Original Score, Best Sound Editing, and Best Sound Mixing. All these awards and no Best Picture? Is Gravity emotionally heart-wrenching and transcendent? Is it just sentimental bullshit in space? Can it be both? In honor of today's movie, I'm going to be climbing into this thing and delivering my recap from outer frickin' space. So feel free to click like and maybe even subscribe so I can continue to do these totally stupid things to entertain you, my fellow film fans. Let's go.
The plot.
The Space Shuttle Explorer is in orbit so a handful of astronauts can give the Hubble Space Telescope a quick once-over. Dr. Ryan Stone, played by Sandra Bullock, is on her first space mission after 6 months of training. She's there to give the Hubble some much-needed racing stripes. While Dr. Stone's doing the upgrading, George Clooney, who's playing Matt Kowalski, is zipping about space saying things George Clooney says, in the exact manner George Clooney always says them. George frickin' Clooney. All of a sudden, Mission Control in Houston tells the crew there's a huge cloud of Russian spy satellite debris hurtling through space in their trajectory at a gajillion miles an hour. That's fancy space talk that only we fancy space people can understand. They're told to get their asses back to Earth right away. So George Clooney instructs Sandra Bullock and the third astronaut, Sharif, to cease what they're doing immediately. But Sandra Bullock's preoccupied with getting her pinstriping just right. So George Clooney has to pull rank on the newbie to get her in gear. They lose contact with Mission Control, and a few seconds later, in a scene I'm tempted to call the greatest demonstration of computer-generated imagery that I've ever seen. Bearing in mind, this little stunt takes me about 5 hours. The supersonic debris smashes everything to bits, sending deadly shrapnel in every imaginable direction, and flinging Dr. Stone into the cold, dark depths of space. Eventually, George Clooney finds Dr. Stone and tethers himself to her so they can go back to the Explorer. But when they get there, the rest of the crew are dead, and their space taxi home suffered catastrophic, irreparable damage. So Bullock and Clooney decide their best chance is to head for the International Space Station, which is about 900 miles away. Which in space distance equals, well, it's still 900 miles. And the excitement's really ramped up when they realize the debris will be back in about 90 minutes. And on their way to the station, the pair makes space small talk, which is different than regular small talk because they're wearing spacesuits. Dr. Stone reveals she has nobody special in her life back on Earth, and she had a young daughter who died as a result of a pointless accident. And as they approach the station, they see the crew's already evacuated, and the remaining escape ships damaged beyond repair, meaning they ain't got no way to get home. Kowalski then suggests they head to the Chinese space station so they can use their spacecraft instead. And with no maneuvering fuel left, the two try to grab onto the ISS. But things go anything but smoothly, and Kowalski ends up detaching himself from their tether to stop Stone from drifting off into space along with him. Which doesn't make a bit of space sense, but whatever. I'm no astronaut. I just dress up like one to try and get subscribers. Stone gets herself back inside the station where she has herself an embryonic moment of symbolic rebirth. Umbilical cord and all. And it's a true moment of cinematic splendor, I might add. And after having no luck contacting George Clooney or Mission Control, she realizes she's the sole survivor. And seconds later, a fire breaks out behind her, forcing her to get her ass in gear yet again. But the ship's all tangled up in parachute, so she's forced back outside to cut herself free. And she does so just in time, as the Russian debris back with a Russian vengeance. She points the escape pod to her next destination, and wouldn't you know it, she's out of fuel. So after kicking and screaming and cursing and failing to contact anybody helpful, she resigns herself to the idea that she's gonna die, and she shuts off her oxygen. And right as she's starting to drift into sweet, sweet oblivion, George Clooney climbs in next to her. He gives her a charming earful and a suggestion for how to get herself out of there, and then he disappears. The otherworldly exchange fills Stone with vigor, so she turns the oxygen back on and acts on Clooney's suggestion. Which was actually her own if you think about it. Propels herself to the next destination. And when she finds she can't dock there, she ejects herself and uses a fire extinguisher to get her the rest of the way. And all of her effort pays off as she gets inside the Chinese capsule just as it's entering the Earth's upper atmosphere.
That's the bad Bernie bit.
And after the roughest of rides, the radio tells her she's being tracked and help is on its way. And then she crashes into a primordial lake and quickly sinks to the bottom of it. And from the murky depths, she swims past amphibians to find oxygen at the surface. And from the surface, she struggles to reach the shore. And from the shore, she fights to get to her feet, and finally to take her first steps against the heaviness of gravity. And in this final scene, Karl closes the story by condensing human evolution into 2 minutes of masterfully shot, beautiful metaphor, reminding the viewer that Dr. Stone's strength is within all of us as human beings.
And there you have it, the plot to Gravity. Let's take a look at the cast.
The cast.
Nearly every lead actress in Hollywood was approached for this role before they settled on Sandra Bullock. Cuarón was looking for somebody to carry the whole film themselves the way Tom Hanks did in Castaway. Bullock was nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars for this role, and while she certainly possessed the requisite physical attributes, I found it difficult to connect with her beyond her role as an astronaut. That's kind of a big deal when you're carrying an emotionally charged film like this yourself. I mean, anybody that's seen Castaway knows how easy it was to get behind Tom Hanks. Robert Downey Jr. was slotted for the Kowalski role initially, and for me, George Clooney didn't stand out in this role for the same reasons he doesn't stand out in any of his other roles. He is eternally George Clooney. He didn't bring anything unique to Kowalski, he didn't do anything he hasn't done in every other movie, and as a result, he contributed to my difficulty connecting with the emotional aspects of this story, despite my full awareness of them.
The good bits.
I dabble in 3D art. And I know from personal experience, this movie is a technical masterpiece. At no point do you doubt you're drifting weightlessly through space witnessing devastation of epic proportions, and sometimes from within the actual helmets of the astronauts. And beyond the technical aspects, there were visual moments in this movie that are simply unrivaled in film. Even while I was reviewing Gravity before writing this, I found myself pulled out of analytical mode by the aesthetics several times. The same could be said for the scoring. The soundtrack feels more intrinsic to this film's atmosphere than any I can recall in recent memory. It immerses you in long, soundless stretches that yield only to the jarring, heavy bursts of sonic exclamation points that convey the hostility of our solar system in a very convincing manner. It doesn't just turn the sound down, it allows you to feel the nothingness of the cosmos in a way I don't think I've ever seen before. And as a cinephile, I'm obviously a fan of Kubrick's 2001. And all these factors combined work as a safety net. If you're not the type of person that's interested in deeper meanings and allegory, you can easily get by on Gravity's visuals alone. In terms of overall story, the title invites you in under a pretense, only to have that pretense float away when the second layer of meaning dawns on you. In space, gravity's obviously absent, whereas down here on Earth, that gravity, that heaviness, weighs you down. It fucks with your joints and gives you wrinkles, and ultimately contributes to your demise. But gravity in this story, as it relates to Dr. Stone, refers to the heaviness of the difficult events that constitute a huge portion of her life as a modern human being. Think of the ominous space debris looming and unpredictable and potentially devastating as adversity through this metaphorical lens. And after hearing Dr. Stone speak about herself, you could argue she's in outer space specifically to avoid the gravity of her personal situation on Earth. Her arc in this story, or her journey from a place of emotional weightlessness to a place of acceptance of all those heavy things, is encapsulated in the closing scenes when she's literally in a capsule, acknowledging everything she's been running from. So for Dr. Stone, gravity is literally life. And in this context, choosing to turn her oxygen back on represents the choice to accept life and all of its heaviness, regardless of whether or not the capsule gets back to Earth in one piece. That's not the point. She's taken the gravity of life back onto her shoulders.
The shite bits.
My qualms with this movie are relatively minor. The plot's based on Murphy's Law. The cast is shuttled from one disaster to the next. In terms of action, this can be a really powerful approach, and for the most part, it works for Gravity. But without a solid emotional connection to the characters, I think they missed out on some potentially powerful scenes. When Dr. Stone reveals the details of her personal life on Earth, she clearly sounds depressed, and to me, that would be impossible to hide during the extensive psychiatric hoops every potential astronaut's obligated to jump through. So I can't see NASA sending somebody like that into space in the first place, especially given the obvious lack of confidence she displayed with processes and procedures when things got hairy. But yes, and I could hear you rightfully saying, a person without these issues would have nothing to struggle against in this movie. And I agree with you. It was a necessity, which is why I said my qualms are relatively minor.
There were also a few physical things that pulled me out of the story momentarily. But I mean, come on. Shit's gotta look realistic, right?
She climbs into vessels that have been floating dormant for ages in the extreme temperatures of space, and within a few seconds they're full of heat and enough oxygen for her to sit down comfortably in her skivvies, as if she just collapsed onto a couch in her front room.
The scene where George Clooney detaches himself never made any space sense to me, but if I'm honest, it really didn't bother me that much because it ties in perfectly with my final shite point.
An Ocean's 11 face is not the appropriate face when you're untethering yourself from your actual life to die a terrible, lonely, freezing cold death in your own private black hell.
Try getting some range, George. It's not hard.
The verdict. So,
Should you watch Gravity if you haven't already seen it? Or should you eject the film deep into space where aliens might eventually find it so they can hate George Clooney's acting too? Overall, this movie is a resounding yes from me. It is visually spectacular, it operates on a second, deeper level if you're in the mood for some metaphors, and if you're not, it's still an amazing sci-fi action flick by itself. One recommendation: the bigger the TV, the louder the sound, the better. Until next time, folks. It's me, Johnny, from that thing you just watched. If you enjoyed it, go down there and smash me in the face to subscribe. And if you want to watch another thing, there's one right there. Do it!